September 1st, 1943. At Rabaul Airfield, Japanese ace Saburo Sakai scans an intelligence report. The Americans, it says, have built a new fighter, heavy as a bomber, clumsy as a transport. He laughs. What Sakai did not know, what no Japanese pilot in that tent could imagine, was that in just 30 days, that laughter would turn into last letters home. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Within minutes, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service destroyed 347 American aircraft, losing only 29 of their own. In the Philippines and Darwin across the South Pacific, the story was the same. Allied fighters fell like autumn leaves. Hurricanes P-40, Warhawks Buffaloes. None could stand against the Zero. Pearl Harbor, 347. Allied aircraft destroyed 29 Zeros, lost. Philippines 103, destroyed versus 7, lost. Darwin 30, destroyed versus 2, lost. Combat radius 2,000 kilometers are unheard of for a fighter. Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. American planes fly like trucks. The Zero's secret was radical minimalism. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. Even radios were sometimes removed to save weight. Every ounce sacrificed for agility and range. The Hellcat, by contrast, embodied the opposite philosophy. 6 heavy Browning 50 caliber guns, bulletproof glass, 200 pounds of armor, a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney double Wasp engine. On paper, it looked like David facing Goliath, except Goliath was wearing armor, and David was naked. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius of Pearl Harbor, reviewed the Hellcat's specifications. His verdict was dismissive. The Americans have learned nothing.
The Hellcat is no match for our Zero
will fly circles
fighters
around this overweight beast. And the mathematics seem to agree. In a turning fight, the Zero's tighter radius would always win. What Genda could not see was that America was preparing an entirely different equation. One not built on turn radius or pilot instinct, but on industry training and an air combat system that would render traditional dogfighting obsolete. For 2 years, the rising sun reigned supreme. The Zero was legend, its pilots demigods of the sky. But legends are fragile, and across the ocean in Long Island's Grumman factory, America was forging a machine built not to duel, but to dominate. September 30th, 1943. Marcus Island, Petty Officer. First Class. Yoshio Fukui mistook the Hellcat for a bomber. Within seconds, that mistake nearly killed him. The Hellcat did not run. It did not try to turn. It went vertical. At 15,000 feet, it performed a hammerhead and fell onto Fukui's tail. 6 Browning 50s opened fire 17 hits in 3 seconds. Fukui barely made it back to Marcus Island. His wingman did not. 5 days later at Wake Island, the Zeros held every advantage altitude position surprise. Victory was certain, but when they dove, the Hellcats did not scatter. They held formation. They absorbed the fire, and then they struck back. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat still had 1650 horsepower. The Zero was down to 900. They came down like hawks on sparrows. 8 Zeros were shot down. Not a single Hellcat was lost. By late 1943, the United States Navy had given its fighters a second set of eyes. Combat information centers aboard carriers and cruisers used radar to see Japanese aircraft 50 miles away. Controllers vectored Hellcats to altitude heading even the sun's position. The Japanese still relied on eyesight. Their Zero pilots were blind men fighting opponents who could see in the dark. The Hellcat was never designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed to never need to. Energy fighting boom and zoom, convert altitude into speed strike hard, then climb away. Zeros that tried to follow stalled out easy prey for the next pass. Another tactic, the thatch weave. 2 pairs of fighters crossing back and forth covering each other's tails. A Zero closing in on one Hellcat would fly straight into the guns of the other. Teamwork turned the Americans into a machine. The Japanese still flew like lone samurai. Radios, which Japanese intelligence mocked as excess weight, became the backbone of American air combat. Every Hellcat carried VHF or UHF sets. Every pilot was part of the network. In the Zero, many pilots flew without radios at all, their wings silent, their formation coordination improvised. Training made the difference. American naval aviators entered combat with at least 300 flight hours 50 in type. They had fired thousands of practice rounds landed on carriers until it was second nature. By 1944, Japanese pilots were rushed to the front with barely 200 hours. Many had never fired their guns in flight. Some had never landed at night. They were children sent against professionals. USN pilot, 1944, 300H, HRs 50 in type. Thousands of rounds fired. IJN pilot, 1944, 200 Herschers, 50 practice rounds total. Fuel shortages forced glider training. Production itself became a weapon. Grumman's Bethpage plant rolled out a new Hellcat every 60 minutes. 12,000 in just 30 months. In 1944 alone, America built 35,000 fighters of all types. Japan built barely 5,000. Numbers mattered. Quality maintained despite speed. America's industrial machine dwarfed the rising sun. The Hellcat even conquered the night. The F6F variant carried the AN Ultra APS-6 radar, a glowing eye in the dark. Armed with two 20mm cannons and 4 machine guns, it hunted Japanese bombers under moonless skies, a capability the Zero never possessed. By late 1943, the laughter had stopped. The Zero was still graceful, still deadly in a turn. But the Hellcat had rewritten the rules. With radar to guide it, with tactics to protect it, with training and production behind it, the Hellcat was not a fighter. It was the sharp edge of an entire system. And soon in the skies, over Wake Rabaul and the Marianas, that system would go to war. By November 1943, the myth of invincibility was cracking. Over Rabaul, Japanese pilots faced something alien enemies who refused to fight their fight. Veteran Ace Lieutenant Commander Tanamizu, with 32 victories, told his men bluntly, "Forget everything you know.
We have no
The
choice
Americans
but to
fight
push on."
like executioners, not warriors." Guided by radar, Hellcats swept down on Rabaul from unseen altitudes. Japanese formations broke apart before the first trigger was pulled. The age of instinct was over. The age of the system had begun. June 19th, 1944. The Battle of the Philippine Sea. Ozawa committed 9 carriers and 450 aircraft, the last great gamble of Japanese naval air power. Against them, Task Force 58, with 15 carriers, 956 aircraft, nearly half Hellcats. Radar picked up the Japanese strike 150 miles out. The Hellcats climbed into position, stacked from 20 to 30,000 feet, a steel curtain. The Japanese came in waves. 69 aircraft in the first 42 never returned. Commander David McCampbell, CAG of Air Group 15, shot down 7 in a single day. His wingman Roy Rushing, 6 more. McCampbell reported simply, "The Zeros tried to turn with us. We refused. We made high side runs, shot 1 down, zoom climbed. They stalled. Another Hellcat finished the job." Japanese losses, 350 carrier aircraft, plus 200 land-based entire campaign. 3 carriers sunk. American losses, 123 aircraft, most in night landings. It was no longer a duel. It was slaughter. American pilots called it the Turkey Shoot. Japan's carrier air arms ceased to exist in 2 days. October 1944, Formosa. Japan proclaimed a stunning victory. 26 American carriers and battleships sunk, 300 aircraft destroyed. Reality was harsher. American losses fewer than 100 aircraft. Japanese losses more than 300. Admirals Kusaka and Fukudome had spent the last reserve
Japan's
of veteran
strength
pilots.
has hollowed.
The core was gone. By Lady Gulf, Japan would fight with an empty shell. October 24th. Commander David McCampbell, the Navy's ace of aces, led just 7 Hellcats against nearly 60 Japanese aircraft. In 90 minutes of combat, McCampbell shot down 9 5-0s, 4 bombers. His wingman Roy Rushing destroyed 6 more. Outnumbered 8 to 1, the Hellcats returned untouched. It was no longer about courage. It was energy, command, and discipline. Okinawa, April to June 1945. Japan unleashed 1,900 kamikaze sorties. The Hellcat became not just a fighter, but a wall. 38,000 combat sorties, 2,351 victories, 249 losses. Nearly 80% of kamikaze aircraft were destroyed before reaching the fleet. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia called it the mowing machine. 4 Hellcats line abreast, 100 yards apart, sweeping through Japanese formations at full speed. 23 kills in the campaign. Kamikazes fell like stalks of grain. The Zero was not the only foe. Late war designs like the Kai-84 Hayate and N1K2J Shirinkai could match or even exceed the Hellcat in performance. But they came too late in too few numbers, flown by too few trained pilots. Against the Hellcat, even the Ki-84 suffered a kill ratio of nearly 10-1. The Hellcat even flew with the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm, 1,263 aircraft under Lend-Lease. In European and Mediterranean skies, opportunities were fewer, only 52 kills recorded. But the 1844th Squadron alone claimed 32.5 victories. Another reminder, the Hellcat was a global weapon. From Rabaul to the Marianas, from Leyte to Okinawa, the Hellcat turned from hunter into harvester. It was no longer duel, no longer combat. It was the systematic dismantling of an air force. Samurai courage met industrial war, and in that meeting, one side vanished. The mathematics were merciless. Over 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed, fewer than 300 lost in combat. A kill ratio of 19-1, 13-1 against the Zero itself. 12,000 Hellcats produced in just 30 months. The numbers tell a story more brutal than any dogfight. History is never clean. Even the details demand care. It is Rabaul, not Rabaul. Truk Lagoon, not TR Lagoon. Kamikaze, not Kamikaze. And even the war's last aerial victory remains debated. August 15th, 1945 saw final clashes, VF-88 over Tokyo VF-31 from Belleau Wood. We should speak not of a single bullet, but of the last battles fought in the final hours of a long war. Japan brought a sword to a gunfight. The Hellcat prevailed, not because of one pilot, not because of one design, but because behind every aircraft stood an entire system, radar tactics, training industry. The Zero made Japan a legend. The Hellcat made that legend mortal. And history's judgment is simple: in modern war, the system wins. F6F Hellcat 19-1, the last laugh of the Pacific War.